Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Well, hello, everyone, again, and welcome to this episode of Driving the Line. I'm one of your hosts, Barry Harrison, along with my good friends and colleagues, Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, and Jim Seibert. This episode is one of my most favorites that we've done, and we're actually today we're joined by a guest. That's the president and CEO of Oklahoma Trucking Association. And that's something we're going to be talking about today, the different benefits of being members of your state trucking associations. And so we're joined by Mr. Jim Newport. When we're here recording at the Oklahoma Trucking Association offices in beautiful Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Jim Newport was hired in 2015 as the CEO and president of Oklahoma Trucking Association. He actually served 10 years in the Oklahoma legislature. And I know that he's got some experience within industry that we can dig a little deeper into as we jump in here. But, you know, I just want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much to Mr. Newport and Oklahoma Trucking Association for allowing Mr. Seibert and myself to come down and just have a good conversation with someone who's a true advocate for the industry. So, Jim, with that, if you want to say hello.
Well, hello to everyone. Barry, glad to have you and Jim here. You're always welcome, and appreciate what you guys do for the industry, seriously. So happy to be here and join you.
Thank you very much. You know, Jim, if you will, I briefly introduced you. If you want to just, you know, kind of open it up and give us a little information about, you know, what you do this time of year. I know that it's that time of year when it gets, you know, really busy in terms of legislation coming out and things like that. What's your day-to-day look like right now?
Yeah, good question. Right now is a little bit busy. I call it the period of time where you're reading bills. And I don't know who all your listeners might be. And so I'm not trying to talk down to anybody ever, because I don't know what people know or don't know. But typically, whether it's in your local state house, your capital, or in Washington, D.C., a bill is simply another name for an idea. A legislator or a congressperson has an idea, and that idea is what's called a bill, and it gets introduced into the process at whatever capital the policy maker is serving in, whether it's DC or the state capital. It gets introduced, and then it starts down this lazy river of a process. It gets assigned to a committee, and it has to get out of the committee, and then it has to go to the floor of the House of Origin. So that means House of Representatives or the Senate, depending on where it was introduced. And if it makes it through there, then it crosses over the chamber to the other House of Origin, goes into that committee, has to get passed, and then goes to that floor, has to get passed, and then it goes to the governor or the president of the United States for a signature. And at that point, this idea, this bill, becomes a law. So it's kind of a fluid movement. So forgive me for meandering there just a little bit, Barry, but you ask what's going on right now. As of last Thursday, depending on when this podcast is aired, a week ago today was the deadline for the Oklahoma legislature to actually introduce these bills, these ideas into the legislature. So think about putting them in the hopper and churning it around, and let's see what happens. And about 3,200 bills, ideas were filed. So I've been reading bills. And so, thankfully, they're not all related to trucking or the trucking industry. So I say this jokingly. Please don't beat up my wonderful host. But, if it's education, fine. I read the short title, but I don't care. Healthcare, fine, great. We need that, but I don't care. In other words, we're really zeroed in and targeted because we're industry specific, right? So we care about commercial motor vehicles. We care about CDLs. We care about insurance. We care about infrastructure, which is in our world is road and bridges. So those are the bills that we're looking for, capturing those, and then we'll follow them and engage appropriately for 4 months' time. So, win, lose, you're trying to push something and get it to the governor's desk, or the industry might be opposed to it, might be really bad for the industry. So anyway, I hope that answers your question.
Oh, that's a great answer. And so, to kind of outline it there a little bit, let's say we've got, 3,200 bills and we're vetting to see if anything is industry specific, trucking industry specific. So what does it look like, from a member? Let's say I've not been very involved in OTA and, here's this bill that it's just a terrible idea. What does it look like when you communicate to your members, and kind of what is the benefit there of being a member of this association?
Yeah. So a couple of things. What I'll do and have done and do for our members is create this master list. So I just described to you, that we're sorting through over 3,000 bills, and we'll take those and put them in a bucket, and I'll create a list and we'll send that out to our members here over the course of the next couple of weeks when it's all finalized. And that'll actually come to your inbox. Our members get a weekly newsletter. You're aware of that, of course. So here in Oklahoma, ours goes out every Tuesday morning, mid-morning, and you'll be able to see that list. You'll be able to click on it. You'll see all of them in what we call the short title. So it's not going to be 300 pages of the bill, but it's going to be the title that'll give you the gist of the idea. And if you're interested in that, you can click on that bill number and read the bill in its entirety. So not everybody's going to do that. And I don't fault that. I mean, that's part of my job, but it's available, and it's a huge resource to our members for those that care about whatever issue, whether it's insurance or litigation, lawsuit reform, whatever it might be. You'll be able to look at that and see it. So that's one value that right there, specifically related to legislation and being filed, and all of this, Barry, as you know, it deals with our engagement and our advocacy or lobby effort at the state capitol. And every state association does that. Now, obviously, there's lots of other things that a state trucking association does, but for this moment, we're talking about capital stuff.
Sure, absolutely. My next question kind of, it revolves around a little bit, and we can think of it through the legislative lens also. But when you have, things that are compliance related or safety related that may come down the pipe, does Oklahoma Safety and Security Council, do they play a role in some of the decision making there? Do they work as almost a resource for you?
Absolutely. You cannot understate how important they are. So during last year's legislative session, for example, and I'm not trying to make any excuse for myself, but from where I sit, I'm directing an organization. I'm the tip of the spear, and you mentioned my past legislative experience, so that makes me dare I say, a pretty good fit for knowing what's going on at the Capitol and how the process works. Well, I'm doing that. So just to be blunt, I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. Right. I know just enough to be dangerous.
Yeah.
But I have resources everywhere. And our Oklahoma Safety and Security Council, the professionals those safety professionals in our carrier company members, I'll turn around and say, hey, here's a piece of legislation that's going to require self-insurance, for example, up to a threshold of, let's say, $1 million or whatever, in case you have a spill on the side of the highway. Is this good, bad? What do you think? What are you doing? And I need to know, because the committee is going to meet 3 days from now. Yep. And those people will turn that around. They know, and they're on it. What a huge, valuable resource. And I'm so proud of our Oklahoma Safety and Security Council. they grow, they're thriving. They're so important. And so, yes,
Right.
they are an integral part of the process.
Right. And I have to, I'll be honest. I'm kind of a newer member of Oklahoma Trucking Association and associations in general, but we're joined today obviously by Mike Bohan and Kenny Ray and Jim Seibert, who are all very involved in various associations. Mike's Missouri Trucking Association and Kenny's Texas Trucking Association. So, I want to kind of call on them and say, hey guys, tell us a little bit about what you guys have going in your states and what the similarities are and differences and things like that, and ask any questions you may have.
Mr. Newport, this is Kenny Ray down in Texas. And first of all, I bring you greetings from the Texas Trucking Association. And thank you again for being our guest today. And first of all, I loved your civics lesson that it brought back so many memories from high school civics about how our government works. And that was excellent explanation of the process, the way a bill goes through to finally meandering its way over to the executive branch to be enacted. And thank you for that. You mentioned several of the topics that OTA is interested in, and I think there's one that transcends state lines, and that's lawsuit reform. You mentioned that, and it's been a hot button topic for us here in Texas, and I think it is for everybody in our industry to, stop these nuclear verdicts and some of these outrageous lawsuits that, in all honesty, have no genuine merit at all, and yet certain ones of them still end up in litigation. And I just wonder, is that a legislative priority this year? How's Oklahoma looking, at lawsuit reform in terms of how that would affect our trucking industry?
Great question, Kenny, and back at you in regards to saying hello to Texas Trucking Association and my good friend, Southern Gentleman John Esparza, who I think leads your organization and, as far as I know, does a fantastic job.
Yes, sir.
So, to your question, lawsuit reform should be on the tip of any trucker's tongue. And when I say truckers, that's a pretty broad brush. I'm saying state associations. I'm saying the carriers themselves, the safety departments, the drivers. We all have seen and heard the horror stories of nuclear verdicts that you mentioned, Kenny, which for listeners who may not be aware, and I'm sure everybody is, you could have a carrier who was involved in an accident who gets sued, taken to court, and all you got to do is look at billboards around of more than a few attorneys saying, hey, if you got a problem, call me and I'll come to the rescue. They're swinging for the fences in terms of dollar amounts. And don't forget that they'll get somewhere between 30 and 40% of any judgment that's handed down. And we've got video evidence before where a trucking company and a driver is not at fault, where someone else has literally crossed the center median and hit the truck head on. And that carrier, can get sued for $100, $200, $300 million. I mean, just atrocious stuff. So how does that happen? And what can we do to try to rein in that judicial system and make it more fair and equitable? So that's the nature of lawsuit reform. Kenny, specifically, I've been told by the American Trucking Association and their legal division that Oklahoma is not necessarily what's called a judicial hellhole. I'm not trying to be cute by that, but a hellhole is a state that is ripe for being able to sue and win. That's a judicial hellhole. Now, part of that, to be honest, is we're not nearly as big as you guys, Kenny. I mean, I think you got like 8 million people in the city of Houston alone, and we have 4 million in the entire state. So it could be a function of activity, fewer trucks, fewer miles driven, fewer accidents, that sort of thing. That could be a reality. However, that doesn't mean that we don't have room for improvement on judicial reform. One of the things here in Oklahoma, and I know you guys in Texas have really worked hard, and you passed meaningful legislation, and I think there's still ongoing work. But one of the things that we could do here in Oklahoma, for example, is we have what's called a Judicial Nominating Committee, JNC. And really what that means is when there's a vacancy on the bench, if people say the court, again, not talking down to anybody, but people say the court, they're really saying the judge. The judge is the court. It's the same thing. So if there's a vacancy in the court, a judge is gone, then what happens in Oklahoma is this Judicial Nominating Committee sends the governor 3 names, and the governor picks one of those, has to pick one of those 3. Well, what you don't necessarily know is who makes up this Judicial Nominating Committee. Well, over half of them are the trial bar. So there's that. And then there's some that are appointed by the House, some by the Speaker, that sort of thing. Most of them are from the legal community. So those who feel abused in the system would say that the Judicial Nominating Committee itself is biased towards the trial bar. And therefore, those are more than likely going to be the names that are appointed. And the governor only has a choice of picking one of those 3. So what would you do about that? Well, there's been discussion and even legislation filed, has not passed yet, that would change up the makeup of that Judicial Nominating Committee, or go so far as to say, just get rid of it and let the governor use their discretion. And immediately people will say, well, it turns partisan. If it's this governor while they're in office, they're going to pick their friends. And yes, and then when another one is in office, they're going to pick their friends. So that pendulum of conservatism and progressivism is going to, go back and forth, not necessarily in Oklahoma. We're one of the reddest states in the union, literally. But Judicial Nominating Committee is one area that we could take a bite at the apple, Kenny. I know that was a long answer. And then just to be blunt, every legislature typically has lawyers who are elected officials. And lawyers are going to look out for lawyers. And so even if you do file a piece of legislation, don't count on it going anywhere. So anyway, more than you cared to know, but that's.
No, and I think you hit on something really important, because normally when people think about lawsuit reform, they're actually looking at legislation that primarily limits jury verdicts. But you hit on something that there ought to be times we look at the process of how judicial officials end up on the bench, because that's trying to get ahead of the game, before the game even starts. And I love that. I had not thought about that, and I think that's an excellent answer. I want to ask you one other question. I'm going to yield to my other 2 colleagues, because I know they would like to visit with you too. With me in Texas, and clearly y'all are a very friendly neighbor to us to the north, probably in everything except college football. But outside of that, to Texas and Oklahoma, we get along really, really well. And we have a lot of our motor carriers, our trucking companies in Texas, that have operations in the state of Oklahoma. I don't mean they just pass through your state. They actually have fixed facilities. They have terminals. And likewise, y'all have companies in Oklahoma that have huge operations in my state. And some of your most active members, and we don't name companies on this podcast, but I'm thinking about one that's possibly in the Enid, Oklahoma area, has huge operations in Texas, and they're very active in our trucking association, just like they're active in yours. And I want to give you an opportunity for just a moment, because a lot of motor carriers in Texas listen to this podcast, for you to extend an invitation. This is free advertising for the Oklahoma Trucking Association for Texas trucking companies that have a footprint in the great state of Oklahoma. What would you tell them if you were sitting right now having a cup of coffee or drinking a glass of tea with them? What would be the advantage of a Texas Trucking Association becoming a member of the Oklahoma Trucking Association?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I totally agree. And not just Oklahoma Trucking Association, but any state trucking association where you run a truck through there, you ought to support them. And that's partly what I would say. If we were sitting there having coffee, I'd say, look, we need you. But just to be blunt, you need us too. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You guys, you and Jim, you guys are, Mike, Kenny, you guys are regulatory folks and background. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You're going to have a question. You're going to have a ticket. You're going to have where do I register? You're going to have, how come I can't get my driver health certificate renewed? What, you're going to have stuff like that all the time. And here in Oklahoma, we have all of those partnerships. It doesn't mean you get out of jail free. It doesn't mean you necessarily get to knock people down to get in the front of the line. But that's what we do. We have regulatory partners. We know the system. That's a huge value right there. I'll give you another quickie, and this kind of goes back to a piece of legislation, but a couple of 3 years ago, something like that, piece of legislation was ran that said if you buy a trailer, own a trailer, register a trailer, manufacture a trailer, or sell a trailer in Oklahoma, it must have side underguard rails. Okay. Well, now that idea is not necessarily new. It's kind of been kicked around. And of course, they have a rear one now. We all know that. But what it would have done is it would have really just knocked out the trailer industry in Oklahoma altogether. You couldn't drive through the state unless you had side underguard. It doesn't matter if you're a member of Oklahoma or based in Oklahoma. A Texas carrier could not drive through the state without having that equipment. Well, you're not going to do it. You're going to go around, or you're just not going to bring the load. You can't sell a trailer. You can't So anyway, we defeated that soundly. There's just one little example right there as to why out-of-state carriers ought to support and be members of neighboring or states trucking association that they run through. They should be. It's a win-win both ways, in my opinion. And thank you for asking that.
And a great answer. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
This is Jim. Allow me to make a plug here. So for our listeners, you guys remember my story. I'm the ag OSHA guy, right? And I came from a national association. And I can imagine that some of our listeners are saying, well, we're really small. You know, we're a 4 or 5 truck company, tractor trailer. Why would what are the benefits of us being a member of an association where I'm going to have to pay some fees here or some dues to be a member? Large or small, think of it this way: super large trucking companies, they may have their own lobbyists. They've got their own lobbyist up in DC. They pay him a full-blown salary. They carry a lot of weight because they're up there staying in front of the lawmakers. Small companies, the association is your lobbyist. The association is your voice on a large scale that has the connections, that has the ear. They know how to work through the sometimes political nightmare. That's for us common folk. That's what it feels like when we think of politics. Man, it's how do I navigate it? I don't even know where to start. Whether you're large or small, that is what that state association provides you. And you may be a small company and say, well, I don't really like some of the stuff that's come out or what I've seen get passed. Associations operate on the greater good of the industry. Always the greater good, the picture that drives profitability and business all together. And so even if there's something that ever came out that you're like, I really don't like that happened, it's for the benefit of all, not just one company, not just the largest company. An association is driven, the direction is driven by the board of directors. And who makes up those board of directors? The trucking companies, the industry companies, and it's their association. So thanks and Jim, if you want to expand on that at all, by all means, but I wanted to plug that in there from my association background and how on the ag side, we've got the real big and the real small. and there's the common ground of how do we protect the industry and keep the industry moving forward. We're not a big enough company to hire our own lobbyists. That's what our association does for us.
Well, Jim, you said it very well, and I totally agree. We love carrier members of all sizes. We'll take the 4 or 5 fleet, the 40, the 50, whatever. Often, if they do not realize the value of State Trucking Association membership, really they're getting a free ride on the backs of the carriers who are members of the association, and not just the Oklahoma Trucking Association, but generally speaking, we protect, we promote, and we provide for the industry. We're not the only ones, but our tagline and our mission statement is we're the voice of trucking in Oklahoma, and have been since 1932. So I take that personally very, very seriously. And it's like family. And I don't say that lightly. We all need each other. And I don't want this to sound arrogant. I don't want to sound insensitive to you or your listeners. But a trucking company's members' dues that they pay, just to be blunt, is not going to make or break the Oklahoma Trucking Association. And it shouldn't. We run very, very prudent and conservative. The point is, it's not about, ooh, I just want your money and you should be a member. That is not the point at all. The point is, trucking is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the country, if not the world. It just is. And we've all seen through things like COVID and strikes at ports, where if you have a chink in the supply chain and those trucks slow down or stop, we see what immediately happens to the backbone of the economy. So for those reasons, that's why we need to unify together, large, small, everybody, and represent and be the voice of trucking, not just in Oklahoma, but across America. So anyway, thank you, Jim, for mentioning that, and I totally agree. And that would be my heartfelt invitation for any carrier. You really should be a member. You really should. You need them. They need you. We all, patriots, everybody, we need trucking.
Well, Mike Bohan here, Mr. Newport. I appreciate what you're saying there. I agree 100%. This is an industry where it takes all of us pulling in the same direction for sure. And I want to kind of go back to what you were talking a little bit there about some of the challenges that we face in this industry, and that we are one of the most heavily regulated industries in this country, which we are, especially depending on what folks are hauling and where they're going, and it can be overwhelming. But one of the things that came up in one of our safety council meetings here just a little while back, and actually Mr. Crawford over here brought it up, and it was predatory towing issues. And I know this is not a state, an individual state problem. I mean, this spreads clear throughout the country. And I wanted to kind of pick your brain on this to see, what issues the state of Oklahoma has had with predatory towing companies, and if any, and what you guys have discussed, maybe what you're talking about doing, because that's something that was brought up in our meeting. And I know I've worked with other state associations where we've had companies based in Missouri that had an issue in another state, and we reached out to that state's trucking association, and they were able to help us out a little bit there. So, that kind of goes back to that whole we need each other thing. But I wanted to pick your brain on this predatory towing issue because I know it's a big deal for a lot of states.
Sure. You're exactly right. And before I dive too far into where we're at on predatory towing in Oklahoma, to your point about a carrier out of state calling a state saying, hey, I feel like I was taken advantage of in your state. I couldn't tell you how many of those I've dealt with. And usually the way that comes is a carrier may sometimes not, but they may be a member of their state trucking association. And they say, for example, and I'll use Oklahoma in this case, hey, we had a towing expense in Oklahoma. We feel like we got gouged. We don't think that's fair. And so one of my peers, yours, of course, Tom Crawford, and I've already mentioned John Sparsa, but we pretty much all know each other. And so, and I would do the same thing if it was an Oklahoma carrier, and we'd say, hey, call my peer in Oklahoma. So I get a phone call from a carrier, and I try to walk them through and show them the path of remediation, how to remediate this discrepancy. Thankfully, in Oklahoma, we do have a regulatory process for non-consensual tows. That's the fancy name for your listeners of towing when you didn't want to be towed. You had to be towed. Law enforcement called and you've got to be towed. That's a non-consensual tow. We do have rates that are regulated and a complaint system through the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. A lot of states don't have any regulation on that. And so whenever somebody feels like they've been gouged or protected, then I'll show them and walk them through that process. And I won't say every time, but I've never had any carrier out of state come back and say, man, that was terrible. And on the contrary, they say, thank you very much, saved us thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. Well, now I'm going to go back to what I said a minute ago about the dues and whether they make or break. I'm telling you, I've seen some of those predatory towing bills that have been $80,000, $130,000. And I'm telling you, dues at a state trucking association are peanuts compared to something like that. And so that's just one example of value that we bring. And hopefully you don't ever have to have a non-consensual tow, but that's one example. The other thing is, yes, in the bills that I've mentioned earlier that are being filed, I've already seen about 8. I think what's happening and has happened, we've had at least one or more predatory towing pieces of legislation filed. And what I mean by that is they're in favor of the wrecker companies. They're targeted specifically at commercial motor vehicles, not passenger vehicles, because you can have uninsured motorists. They drive a junker that's parked on the side of the highway. The wrecker company wants to be on the rotation list to be called out, but it's sort of like going fishing or hunting. They're hoping for that big fish or that big game. But if they're next on the list and they got to go out and pick up a junker, there may be nobody that ever comes and gets that thing. And yeah, they're left holding the bag, I guess. So if they can create legislation that gouges or charges commercial motor vehicles a ton of money because they know that we're insured, we have to be insured, then it goes in their favor. Because we keep seeing this over and over, and as you said, Mike, it's not just in Oklahoma, but it's in a lot of states. I believe their national organization has been pretty active, and then it filters down, and they're saying, hey, we don't care what it is, but you need to file legislation in your state. So far, we've been able to beat that back. This year, I've already seen about 8 pieces of legislation, and they're tough. And you may ask, well, what kind of legislation? What are you talking about? Well, for example, I've seen legislation filed again this year, and it has in the past, and it's what they call a combination unit. So we could all, you said we weren't naming names, but we can all imagine a power unit owned by one company pulling a trailer of another company that may or may not have enough power units to pull their own trailers. And then the goods inside of the trailer are owned by somebody else. They just want their goods sent somewhere. And so this piece of legislation called a combo unit, for example, would say that it would be illegal to uncouple that unit, and that if it's a non-consensual tow, wrecker company pulls the whole thing in, and basically it's held hostage. It's sort of like legalized extortion. It would be held hostage until their bill is paid. Well, if it's rear axles and they catch on fire, the first thing I'm going to do, back to safety, is I'm going to uncouple that thing and pull my power unit forward. I'm going to get it out of the way. It's got saddle tanks full of diesel. And I mean, that just makes common sense. Well, this says, no, you got to keep them together. And we're going to tow the whole thing. Well, what if you own the goods that are inside the trailer? Well, you don't own either piece of equipment, and it just got hauled in, and now you're held hostage. You can't even get your stuff to market. These are the kinds of things, and there's plenty of others, but these are the kinds of things that the predatory towing folks are filing across the country. There's other examples. For example, if you do file a tow charge with your insurance, that the record company would have to be a co-signer. So in other words, you don't even get to cash your own check. They sign it and they cash it. We keep seeing stuff like this all the time. And so we'll be facing that battle again, and we'll be reaching out to our members and notifying them with the list, like I said before. And if necessary, we'll go walk the halls of the state capitol.
You've done this a couple different times as you've been talking today, where you answer our question, but you bring up something that oftentimes folks don't think about, and it's the other side of what we're facing. It's like, well, we want legislation that protects the trucking industry, but there's also legislation out there or bills or these ideas that are being placed out there that are really targeting the trucking industry. And that's just kind of goes back to that conversation we were having about the importance of being involved and being a member of an association, and the support that you give this industry, I think, is just invaluable.
Well, if no one else has any other questions or comments they'd like to add, I'd like to just say again, thank you so much to Mr. Newport for being so willing and a gracious host to have us. Jim Seibert and I came down to Oklahoma City today, like I mentioned earlier, and it's a beautiful office here in Oklahoma City. And Jim, we just want to thank you again for having us and all the work that you're doing for the industry that we all love so much. And I just, again, want to encourage anyone who's listening, if you're not a member of your state association, just start there. Just become a member and, attend some of those in Oklahoma Safety and Security Council meeting. Get plugged in with the right people. As iron sharpens iron, so shall one man sharpen the other. So it's a great networking opportunity. It's a great educational opportunity. And again, these are the people who are fighting the fights for us. So
I think you know this, Barry, but yeah, when I got out of college, I went to work for a trucking company, and I started with, of course, I had a college degree, but I started with coveralls and a creeper. If you don't know, a creeper is one of those little boards with four wheels that you roll underneath a truck, and you grease zerts and you change oils. And I started in the shop, and I went through just about I did go through every facet of that company, dispatch, safety department, human resources, all of it. And anyway, wound up getting, on behalf of the company, getting involved with civic community affairs, things like that. And that's how I was recruited to run for office and be elected. And lo and behold, I did that. And now I'm back with the Oklahoma Trucking Association. So I kind of came full circle. I'm sure I have a creeper around here somewhere. Anyway, I am a believer, and I really appreciate all of you guys, your history, what you do for the industry. And thank you for allowing me to be a guest.
You bet. And thank you again. And we'll be speaking to you all next time on Driving the Line.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.